Revenge with Karen.
You're not invited to the leadership offsite, Derek said without even looking up from his phone. It's for strategic heads only. I blinked twice, pretending to jot something down. Strategic heads. That was rich coming from a guy who once asked if quarterly earnings still happen 4 times a year. I just closed our division's biggest deal yet, $42 million net margin. That was after taxes and bonuses. We're the only vertical in the black this year. I didn't even bother defending myself. What was the point? The man thought PowerPoint slides generated themselves and referred to our CRM system as that Excel app. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just invisible, I was inconvenient. If you've ever been in a room where your results spoke louder than your title, you'll know the exact ache I'm talking about. It's like being a ghost in your own success story. Worst part, this wasn't new. My name was never in press releases. I didn't showboat. No ping pong tournaments or thought leadership podcasts. Just 8 years of building the engine while the boys raced in circles, honking the horn. And hey, before we get too deep in the chaos, can I ask you one small thing? If you're listening and you like these kinds of stories where the quiet ones win big and the loud ones fall hard, click that follow button and give this story a like. Keeps the stories coming, and honestly, it keeps the team caffeinated and just petty enough to keep digging for more endings like this one. All right, back to it. I'd been working there since before the first acquisition, before the rebrand. Hell, before we even had a proper HR department, and the CTO was just a guy in flip-flops who couldn't grow a full beard. Back then, our old CEO, James, ran things like a submarine. Tight, precise, quiet. Wasn't flashy, but he knew who built the machine, and he trusted me to build mine. My division focused on mid-market logistics, nothing sexy. But it printed money, predictable, optimized, obsessively fine-tuned. Every quarter, I'd send in my report, hit my numbers, train my team, and go home. I didn't want more. I just wanted the walls to stay up and the clowns to stay out. Then came the post-acquisition shakeup. James was out, the golden parachute, and an NDA the size of a novella. In his place, a new visionary CEO fresh off some glittery IPO where he took credit for someone else's code. Derek, tall, square-jawed, jargon-heavy. The kind of guy who turned team meetings into theater. He brought in his own entourage, brand revitalizers, growth hackers, and one guy whose entire job seemed to be holding an iPad and nodding. I watched as departments were gutted. Sales turned into a social media think tank. Customer support got outsourced to a chatbot named Lily that couldn't distinguish between a billing error and a fire. Meanwhile, our division, still the only one actually making a profit, was labeled legacy operations, which, in Derek speak, meant boring. I didn't push back. I just did what I always did, delivered. Quietly, precisely. With spreadsheets that could slice a diamond. Q4 came in 18% over projections. We outperformed the entire enterprise software wing by 400%. I walked into the exec sync with the numbers in a neat 10-slide deck and handed out printed reports, color-coded, annotated, bulletproof. Derek flipped through the first 2 pages, then dropped it on the table like it burned him. "This is great, Ashley," he said with a smirk, "but what's the story? Where's the narrative? This isn't Netflix." Netflix. I remember thinking, is he asking for plot twist in a revenue report? Instead of asking follow-ups, he pivoted. Literally, he spun on his heel and launched into a monologue about vision-driven verticals, complete with a metaphor about sharks and momentum. Then he announced the reallocation of our budget to fund a new AI branding initiative. He called it Project Lumos, like a spell from Harry Potter. I wish I were joking. My team lost our top analyst, half our dev resources, and our budget buffer in less than 50 minutes. Just like that, the oxygen got sucked out of the room. And me, I just nodded, took back my report, packed up my laptop. But that night, I unlocked a drawer in my home office and pulled out a manila folder. Inside, an amendment, co-signed by Robert, our lead investor. Dated 9 months earlier, back when cash flow was tighter than a drum, and I'd been the only one still closing multi-million-dollar retainers. It wasn't fancy. Just 3 paragraphs buried in a stack of dry legalese. But paragraph 9B, that one had teeth, quiet ones. I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, but because sometimes the foundation remembers who laid the bricks. The first sign Derek was allergic to substance came during our first scheduled one-on-one. It was supposed to be a 30-minute session to align on objectives. I showed up early because that's what adults do. His assistant breezed past me with a to-go green juice, looked up from her phone and said, oh, he had a conflict. Something with the founders of that TikTok-scented candle startup. He sends his vibes. Cool. Instead of getting pissed, I did what any grown woman with a decade of results and a folder of receipts would do. I sat in that glass-walled conference room, opened my laptop, and rewrote the division's 3-year roadmap. Not for Derek, for myself, because clearly the grown-ups had left the building. When he finally acknowledged me 2 weeks later, during an executive sync, he did it in the form of a smug chuckle. I just finished presenting our quarterly metrics, along with a 5-slide roadmap that mapped projected revenue against shifting market demands. Derek leaned back, drummed his fingers on the table, and said, that's adorable. But let's talk about disruption. Real disruption. Because trucks and warehouses don't get you on the cover of Founders Weekly, Ashley. The room laughed, awkward and delayed, like they were waiting to be sure it wasn't a trap. My face didn't move. I kept my eyes on the last slide, an earnings projection that had our division single-handedly carrying the bottom line through Q3 of next year. But trucks and warehouses? Apparently, not sexy enough. The next morning, an email hit inboxes at 7:02 a.m. Subject line, Project Lumos Initiative, Reallocations and Realignment. In short, Derek was redirecting funds from legacy verticals us to spin up a brand engagement strategy powered by AI-generated market sentiment overlays. Whatever the hell that meant. The body of the email read like someone fed a thesaurus into a smoothie blender, talked about redefining narrative architecture and phasing out operational stasis. Translation: my team just got gutted so he could chase clout on social media. We lost 2 senior analysts, 3 devs, and our back-end consultant, who, fun fact, also happened to be the architect of our margin optimization model. That model alone had saved the company $3.2 million over the past 5 quarters. Gone. Wiped out in one click. Derek's version of innovation. Take what works, starve it, then call it outdated. I didn't complain. I didn't cry in the bathroom or spiral into Slack DMs. I just opened my personal Dropbox, created a new folder labeled Insurance, and downloaded a copy of our original team charter, the one signed off by James, our previous CEO, and co-signed by legal. It included detailed breakdowns of team responsibilities, proprietary workflows, implementation protocols. Nothing classified, just irreplaceable. Then I started backing up our documentation. Clean copies, version history, audit trails, not because I planned to use them, but because people like Derek don't read paper trails. They assume everyone before them was incompetent, and that consequences are for people who don't throw TED-adjacent buzzwords around in 48-point font. By Friday, I noticed he'd changed the name of our internal team folder from Strategic Logistics to Ops Legacy Sunset. Sunset, like we were a dying app or a recalled blender. When my team asked what it meant, I said, it means we get to work without him watching. It became a joke. Whenever someone shipped a deliverable that quietly saved another department's ass, we'd say, another win from the Sunset crew. But it wasn't really funny. The humiliation wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. It came in quiet erasures, in nods during meetings that never made eye contact, in budget lines that disappeared without explanation. You start to wonder if you're crazy, if maybe you are just legacy. But then I saw the LinkedIn post. Company-wide bonus announcements. A splashy graphic with fire emojis and the caption, retaining top talent, rewarding excellence. My name was second from the top. Ashley Chen, $180,000 performance retention bonus. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I felt my mouth curl into a smile that hadn't seen daylight in months. You want a story, Derek? Here's one. It starts with a bonus and ends with a clause you never read. The email from HR came sandwiched between a phishing alert and an invite to the company's forced fun culture karaoke night. Subject, quick alignment on role framing smiling face with smiling eyes. First sentence. Hi, Ashley. Hope you're thriving. Second sentence. In light of our evolving team dynamics, we'd love your help in updating your internal bio and LinkedIn to reflect a more collaborative leadership structure. Translation. Derek wanted me to scrub my title, erase anything resembling ownership, and rebrand myself as just another cog in the Lumos machine. Collaborative. I was a flavor of yogurt. I closed the email without replying. HR could keep their emojis and passive aggression. I'd been with this company since before they even knew what collaboration software was. back when we tracked deliveries on whiteboards, and the COO still thought margin meant the Excel kind. But the real kick came 2 days later. I'd prepped a quarterly performance deck for one of our biggest mid-market partners. It was tight. Cross-tab analysis, pipeline forecasts, conversion rate heat maps, clean, sharp, bulletproof. It took me 10 hours to build and 10 years of experience to know what to include. The partner, a VC-backed logistics chain, was skittish after recent volatility. This call mattered. And right before it, literally 4 minutes before I was set to present, Derek's assistant waltzes in with her 2 perfect teeth and says, "Oh my God, Ashley, I think I accidentally deleted your deck from the shared drive when I renamed the folder to QBR Vibes. My bad, do you have a backup?" She blinked at me like a kitten who knocked over a vase. No remorse, just vibes. I said nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee across the room, even though the fantasy was very vivid. Instead, I ran the call from memory, spoke slow, let the silence carry weight. The client signed the renewal anyway, but I saw it. Way Derek smirked in the corner of the call, sipping that lemony swamp water he pretends is juice. Like he'd proven a point. But here's the thing, Derek was playing checkers, and I had a chessboard no one remembered existed. That night, I opened my notebook, the real one. Leather-bound, no Wi-Fi, no audit trail, and I made 2 entries. 1, meet with Robert. 2, meet with Marcy. Robert was the lead investor. Marcy was one of the earliest backers, sharp, ruthless, allergic to bullshit. I didn't schedule back-to-back. I wanted space, room for nuance, no need to telegraph anything. In the meeting with Robert, we talked about Q2 churn, pricing strategy, and the upcoming capital forecast. It all felt routine. But when I slid a printout across the table, the same retention bonus announcement from LinkedIn, his eyes lingered. He tapped the paper once, then looked at me and said, "So, that clause we added, is it still valid?" I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just said, "It's in the version filed with legal." He leaned back, folded his arms, and let out a low whistle. Not the kind of whistle you hear when someone's impressed. The kind you hear when someone remembers they've been sitting on a loaded gun. Marcy's meeting went similarly, though she was far less subtle. "You look like a woman doing her own math," she said, sipping her espresso like it owed her money. "You walking?" "Not yet." "Good," she said. "Let the boy drown in his own Kool-Aid first. Then walk." I hadn't told her anything, and yet she knew. That was the moment the fog started to lift. The shame, the gaslighting, the daily erosion of my place in the machine, it all started to unravel. I wasn't crazy. I was just early to see the cracks, early to document, early to prepare. Back at the office, Derek was launching Lumo's merch. No, really. Tote bags with the logo, sent to influencers. Some kind of LinkedIn live stream was planned where he'd demo our logistics innovation platform that didn't technically exist yet. I saw the invite. I declined. That same afternoon, I opened the amendment folder again, just to feel the weight of it in my hands. Signed by James. Co-signed by Robert. Paragraph 9B, trigger, voluntary resignation by Ashley Chen. Effect, immediate activation of lead investors' buyout rights. Clause remains binding unless formally revoked by both parties in writing. There was no revocation, just paper, waiting, still. I didn't need to fight Derek. I just needed to let him keep talking. It dropped like a piano through a skylight. The post went live on a Tuesday at 9:01 a.m., one of those perfectly scheduled, we love our people, PR fluff bombs. A slick little carousel on LinkedIn, company colors everywhere, complete with curated headshots and generic praise like Ashley Chen, quiet leadership, loud results. But nobody cared about the words. They cared about the number. $280,000 right there under my name, performance-based retention bonus. First on the list. Above department heads, above product, above Derek's handpicked chief vision Sherpa. No asterisk, no explanation. Just a clean, unmistakable figure. I was in the kitchen nuking day-old noodles when the Slack pings started. Soft at first, a trickle, then a storm. Wait, is that real? Ash got 280K? What? Yo, Derek's name's not even on the list Elmau. How does Ops Legacy Girl get the BAG? I muted the channel. Stirred my noodles and smiled. Because here's the part nobody saw coming. That bonus wasn't new. It was inked 3 months prior, quietly tucked into my contract refresh during a period when Derek was too busy keynote speaking at brand summits to notice finance plugging holes in retention metrics. It had been approved by legal, signed by finance, and posted internally. But until today, it hadn't existed in the ecosystem of optics, and optics were Derek's currency. Now, his face was plastered in the comments under the post. People tagging him, wondering why his top AI architect didn't make the cut, asking if Ashley Chen was the real engine behind the company. For someone like Derek, that wasn't a bruise. That was blood in the water. At 9:14 a.m., my desk phone rang. Didn't answer. At 9:21, my Outlook pinged. Urgent sync Derek 9:45. I declined. He came barreling into my office at 9:47 anyway, teeth clenched like he'd been chewing tinfoil. "What is this?" he said, waving his phone. "Why didn't I know about this bonus? Who approved this? Legal, finance. Departments that keep receipts." He stood there fuming, fingers twitching like he wanted to throw something but couldn't decide what would look least unhinged. "This sends the wrong message," he finally said. "We're in a period of reinvention." "And what are you even contributing right now?" I stared at him. Not with rage, not even disdain. Just the sort of cold, disappointed clarity you get when you finally understand someone is too small for the room they're in. I opened Slack. I clicked into the company-wide channel, typed exactly one sentence. "Congrats to everyone recognized. For the record, the loudest work rarely leaves a paper trail." Then I opened LinkedIn, scrolled to my own name in the post, and updated my profile headline. "Measured silence is a sharp blade." Within 5 minutes, it had 300 likes. By lunch, SVP of product sent me a DM. "Want to get coffee sometime? Curious how you pulled that off." I didn't reply. I wasn't pulling anything off. I was holding a string, and Derek had just tugged it with both hands. The board pinged Robert asking if he had known about the bonus announcement going live. He hadn't, but he was amused. I know this because his executive assistant forwarded me the internal note. "Well played. That'll rattle him. Let's see where this goes." We were going somewhere, all right. By 3 p.m., Derek called an emergency meeting titled Strategic Realignment and Talent Equity, which is code for "How do I get the spotlight back on me?" I RSVP'd as tentative. Then I booked a conference room for myself. One with a lock, no windows, and a landline. I made 2 calls. First, legal, to confirm that Clause 9B had no expiration date. Second, my printer. Make 2 fresh copies of the investor amendment on heavyweight paper. Because if Derek wanted a show, I'd give him an ending they'd talk about at every offsite for the next decade. The hallway was too quiet. That's the first thing I noticed. Usually, it buzzed, passive-aggressive Zoom mutterings, fingers clattering on keyboards, the microwave beeping out someone's half-forgotten oatmeal. But today, just silence, like the building knew something was about to snap. Came the footsteps. Not rushed, not stomping, but deliberate, heavy, coming closer. I didn't even look up when Derek appeared in my doorway. His face was the color of a microwave tomato, veins twitching in his neck like they were trying to escape first. Boardroom. Now, that was it. No hello, no context. Just 2 words, sharp and hot and brittle. I clicked save on my screen, closed my laptop, opened the drawer where I'd kept 2 documents for this exact moment. The first, my resignation letter, dated, signed, and notarized because I don't do messy exits. The second, the investor amendment, the original copy signed by James and Robert with a wet signature from legal. The one with Clause 9B, the one Derek didn't know existed. I placed both documents into a slim black folder, zipped it shut, and stood. Halfway out the door, I felt a gentle hand on my elbow. It was Nina, our senior analyst. Sharp as hell, ran most of our churn models without breaking a sweat. She glanced down at the folder in my hand, eyes wide. "You're not going to give it to him, are you?" she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "Not him." She didn't say anything else. Just nodded once, like a soldier watching the general walk toward the last stand. The boardroom door was already open. Eric was pacing inside like a shark that couldn't find a kill shot. The COO sat stiffly at the end of the table, flipping through an iPad with a forced frown. Robert, our lead investor, was already seated, legs crossed, watching the chaos like a man at the opera. There was even a cup of tea in front of him, not coffee. Tea, steeped, calm, patient. I stepped inside, walked past Derek without so much as a nod, and took the seat beside Robert. Derek didn't sit. Of course he didn't. He just barked, "We need to talk about this," holding up his phone with the LinkedIn post still glowing on the screen. "Do you have any idea the optics this creates? We're trying to position Lumos as the future, and now half the company thinks our legacy division runs the show." I placed the folder on the table, opened it slowly. No theatrics, just motion. Deliberate, silent. Derek didn't notice. He was still ranting. "People are DMing me asking why I didn't make the bonus list. Do you know how insane that is? I'm the CEO, not you. You're a relic of a department that was supposed to be sunset. I slid the resignation letter across to Robert without breaking eye contact with Derek. He finally stopped pacing, blinked. Wait, what is that? Robert unfolded the letter and began reading. Slowly. His eyebrows didn't move. His breathing stayed even, but a small, mistakable curl touched the edge of his lips. Not joy, not gloating, just recognition. Derek reached for the paper. Let me see that. Robert raised a hand without looking at him. You'll get your copy. The room went still. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC above us, whispering stale air into a room full of barely contained combustion. Robert placed the letter on the table in front of him, then looked at me and said, "Is there anything else I should be aware of, Ashley?" I nodded once, reached back into the folder, pulled out the second document, the amendment, the one that mattered. I placed it next to the resignation. Robert leaned in. His eyes scanned the text like a man rereading something he already knew by heart. Then he said, Clause 9b. The words hung in the air like a match held over gasoline. Derek blinked. Clause what? I finally spoke. The one that activates your buyout, writes if I resign. On file since February. The COO's iPad dropped to the table with a soft clatter. Derek's face went blank, not angry, not indignant, just confused, like someone swapped the language in his teleprompter. That's not real, he said, almost to himself. That's not enforceable. Robert tapped the paper with one finger. Signed, witnessed, filed, still binding. Derek looked around the room like it might change shape and give him an escape hatch. No one moved. Leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and stared straight through him. This wasn't his boardroom anymore. It never really had been. The boardroom smelled like fear and cinnamon air freshener, an oddly festive pairing for the slow-motion train wreck unfolding inside. Derek was pacing tight circles like a lion on too much pre-workout, muttering to himself in half sentences. The COO sat near the head of the table with his tie undone and a sheen of panic on his forehead, tapping at his iPad like maybe, just maybe, if he refreshed Slack hard enough, someone would show up and save him. And Robert was already there. Leaning back, legs crossed, hands folded like a poker player holding the royal flush and just waiting for someone dumb enough to bet the house. I walked in without knocking. Derek's eyes snapped to me like I'd just kicked in the door, but I didn't even glance at him. No words, no nod, nothing. I just crossed the room, stepped around his frantic orbit, and stopped in front of Robert. He didn't rise, just looked up at me with that same unreadable calm he'd perfected over 3 decades of watching egos collapse under the weight of their own delusions. I unzipped the slim black folder I'd been carrying, pulled out the letter, crisp white paper, my signature in blue ink. I placed it in front of him, centered, clean. Robert took his time unfolding it, smoothed the crease with one hand. Read it, silently. That silence stretched long enough for Derek's brain to catch up, and when it did, he scoffed. Loud, performative, like a man trying to turn panic into confidence through sheer volume. Oh, come on, he barked, throwing his hands up. She thinks you can stop this with a resignation letter. Really, Ashley? You've had a vendetta against me since I got here. This is just another stunt. Still, I said nothing. Robert didn't look at him, didn't flinch. Just kept reading, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, until he hit the bottom. Then he smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cruel, it was the smile of inevitability. The kind that says, I knew this day would come, and you've just handed me the keys. Derek's pacing stopped. He blinked hard the way people do when their internal script has no more lines. The color drained from his face like someone pulled the plug on his Wi-Fi. What the hell are you smiling about? He asked, but his voice cracked on the last word. Robert finally looked up, folded the letter in half, then into quarters, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket like it was a hand-delivered prophecy. Then he said it. Just 4 words. Clause 9b is active. The air pressure in the room changed. I swear to God, even the fake plants leaned in. The COO let out a noise that was either a gasp or a hiccup. Derek looked between the two of us like he'd walked into a play halfway through and realized he wasn't the lead, hell, he wasn't even in the cast. You're bluffing, he muttered, reaching for his phone like the clause might disappear if he just scrolled fast enough. But Robert didn't bluff. He turned to the COO. Do you have legal on standby? The COO nodded slowly. Why, yeah, General Counsel's on call. Why? Robert leaned forward. Because we'll need them to read the amendment aloud, preferably in front of the board. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then turned to me, eyes wild. You think this makes you look smart, walking out right when we're scaling up? You just made yourself unemployable. No one wants a poison pill, Ashley. I tilted my head, finally meeting his gaze for the first time all day. You know what's funny about poison pills, Derek? I said softly. Only the people who try to swallow something they didn't build choke on them. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. Robert turned to me again, voice even. We'll process the letter effective immediately. I nodded. Do you want to stay for the rest? I shook my head. No, I've said everything I needed to, and I had, because this wasn't just a handoff. It was a handover of control, of leverage, of silence weaponized at exactly the right moment. And Derek was finally realizing that the loudest man in the room wasn't the one holding the power. It was the quiet woman who just walked out with the fuse already lit. The chair creaked slightly as Robert leaned forward, the only sound in a boardroom, so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzz overhead. He placed his fingertips together, elbows on the table, and said it like he was reciting the weather. Per Clause 9b, her resignation activates my buyout option. Was it no anger? No pomp, just fact. Clean, sharp, surgical. Across from him, Derek blinked like someone had just flipped the gravity switch and his brain hadn't caught up yet. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That's not enforceable, he finally muttered. No way, that clause was buried. It wasn't ratified in the acquisition. It was, Robert said, pulling a document from his briefcase with the casual grace of a magician, revealing the final card. H4, filed with the amendment package last February. James signed, legal witnessed, still in effect. He slid the document across the table like he was handing over a menu. The paper was pristine. Blue ink, corporate letterhead. Signature lines so clean you could frame them. The COO reached for it, skimmed it, then turned a pale shade of off-white. Derek didn't touch it. Instead, he turned toward the GC, General Counsel, just stepped into the room like she'd been summoned by ritual. You've got to be kidding, he snapped. You knew about this? She didn't flinch. Just adjusted her glasses and began reading the clause aloud. In the event of voluntary resignation by Ashley Chen, the lead investor is granted immediate buyout rights under Section 14.2a without requiring board vote or executive approval. Clause remains active unless nullified in writing by both parties. She looked up, it's binding and current. Derek looked around, wild-eyed, searching for anyone to object, to call foul, to hit undo, but the board, silent, still. Most didn't even look at him. A few just leaned back in their chairs, clearly already making mental notes for what came next. You could practically hear them thinking, we should have seen this coming. Because the truth was, Derek's house of cards had always been propped up by bluster and linked in quotes. No bedrock, no memory, just flash. And now? The one woman who had the memory, the receipts, the quiet leverage was gone, but her shadow was still in the room. And in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug or victorious. I just felt still, balanced, because this wasn't revenge. It was gravity. The clause had been drafted in a dry legal meeting no one remembered, during a cash flow crunch most people had already forgotten. It was never meant as a trap, just a safeguard, a mechanism of trust. But Derek had never trusted anyone, and he never read the paperwork. So now, as he stood there with sweat beading under his collar and panic clawing behind his eyes, he realized the worst truth of all. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a choice he made, one blind dismissal at a time. Robert leaned back, his voice calm as ever. I'll begin drawing up the restructure papers this afternoon. Clause activates full discretion over executive leadership. You'll be briefed on your transition plan by end of week. Derek sputtered. You can't just, I can, Robert said flatly, and I am. The COO exhaled sharply, rubbed his temples, and murmured, God help us. But I didn't need help, not anymore. I had my silence, I had my paper. And now, finally, I had the room, not to speak, but to watch it shift. Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand, didn't even bother clearing his throat. He just said, effective immediately, I'll be exercising the buyout. No gasps, no dramatics, just stunned inertia, like the air in the boardroom had thickened and nobody wanted to be the first to breathe it in. I'll begin a formal restructuring of executive leadership. Legal will circulate the terms within the hour. All standing decisions will be paused pending review. You could see it hit Derek in waves, first confusion, then panic, and that special brand of corporate desperation that smells like sweat and stale ambition. He pushed himself up from his chair, clutched the edge of the table like it might anchor him to something solid, and laughed. Loud, false, sharp at the edges. Okay, I get it. Power play, it's cute. But look, Ashley didn't mean to resign. This is clearly performative, some kind of stunt. He turned to me like I was a reluctant stage prop, waiting for my cue to confirm his delusion. Right, Ash, you're trying to make a point. We can talk this through. Let's sit down, I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out 2 objects, my company-issued phone and my badge. I set them on the table, not with force, not with flair. Just gently, precisely, like I was returning tools after finishing a job. A job well done. Derek stared at them like they were explosives. She's bluffing, he said, but his voice was thinner now. You don't just walk away, not from this level. This kind of capital I said softly. First time I'd spoken since entering the room. The GC didn't look up from her notes. She just scribbled a timestamp and muttered, noted for record. Robert nodded, businesslike, it's done. Derek looked to the board for rescue. One by one, they avoided his eyes. One leaned forward to check their watch. Another stared deeply into the lid of their coffee cup like it held the answers to life. Then the COO, who hadn't said a word in 20 minutes, reached into his folio, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the table to legal. I'd like to be considered for interim, he said calmly. That was the moment Derek finally sat down, or collapsed, really, like the wind had gone out of him, because it had. His empire of ego, built on jargon, half-truths, performance bonuses that never landed, was crumbling before his very eyes, and no one was jumping in after him. Robert stood. I'll schedule follow-ups individually. Until then, please limit external communications. Messaging will go out at 6 p.m. sharp. Legal will supervise all language. He looked at me. Thank you, Ashley. I nodded once. Then I turned and walked out. No grand exit. No final speech. No mic drop. Just silence, my weapon of choice. Behind me, the boardroom didn't erupt. It didn't collapse. It simply adjusted. That's what happens when you pull out the keystone. The structure doesn't fall. It remembers who held it up. The pen made a soft clicking sound as Robert uncapped it. No one spoke. Not the board. Not legal. Not Derek. The air was so heavy with held breath, you could almost hear hearts beating through pressed wool blazers and performance fabric dress shirts. Robert read the buyout notice one last time. Not because he needed to. The man could recite it in his sleep. He just believed in gravity, in ceremony, in making sure the moment landed with the weight it deserved. Then, with the same precision I'd once used to line up KPIs in a pitch deck, he leaned forward and signed. One clean signature. And just like that, Derek's kingdom evaporated. Robert folded the paper in half, then again into quarters. Not rushed, not showy, just deliberate. When he looked up, his eyes locked on Derek. He didn't shout, he didn't sneer, he didn't gloat. He just said, "Congratulations. You just lost control of the company because you ignored her." The words weren't loud, but they hit like a bell inside a crypt. Derek flinched only slightly, but it was the kind of motion that makes everyone else feel embarrassed for you. He didn't move. Just stood there, frozen. He was trying to rewind reality by sheer force of will. His face, once red and furious, was pale now, not with rage, but with understanding. The kind of understanding that comes too late. Across the table, one of the board members gathered their notes. Another coughed and checked their phone. No one would say it out loud, but they were already adjusting their internal org chart, removing one name, elevating another. The chair I'd been sitting in creaked softly as I stood. No farewell speech. No condescending wave. No theatrical pause to look back. I didn't need it, they knew. Robert gave me the smallest nod, one hand still resting on the document that had just rewritten the future. Legal was already collecting phones for comms compliance. The COO leaned back with the posture of a man trying to look neutral and already polishing his interim badge in his head. And Derek, he just stood there, motionless. Eyes bouncing from face to face, as if someone might still jump in, throw him a line, undo the ink. But the pen had moved. The paper was signed, and me, I walked to the door and opened it myself, quietly. No push, no drama, just presence, because I didn't need to burn the building. I was the foundation, and I'd just stepped out. The door closed behind me with a soft click, neither triumphant nor cruel, just final. And in that still, echoing silence, one thought drifted through my mind like a curtain of calm after a storm. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, you just sign your name. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.